With God, there is always more. More love, more life, more freedom. Welcome to Zoweh's Exploring More with Michael Thompson. C.S. Lewis once wrote, "Our Heavenly Father has provided many delightful inns for us along our journey, but He takes great care to see that we do not mistake any of them for home." Join me and the team as we explore the kingdom together, discovering the deep truths and offering encouragement for the journey. There is always more. Welcome, friends and allies, to the Exploring More podcast. I'm Michael Thompson. I'm hanging out with S.J. Jennings, and the beautiful Robin Thompson is with us in the studio.
Hello.
Yeah, it's good to see you.
Good to be here.
A rose between two thorns.
That's right. Beauty and two beasts.
Yeah, at least.
So we got the headphones on and we're mic'd up, and I'm excited, SJ, and I'm kind of sad because this is the end of the Four Pillars series.
Yeah, it's been really cool to go through and talk about, really what our whole endeavor is based upon.
Yeah, I would even say now, Rob, these aren't things that we started with. The pillars were elements and pieces and components that God gave us along the journey.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would echo that. I wasn't there at the foundational meeting, hey, let's create Zoweh.
Right.
But all these pillars, I kind of discovered them along my own journey. So I can only imagine that you guys did a lot of the same and then applied them to who we want to be as an entity.
Yeah. Culture, strategy, branding, mission, vision. All those things you can set out, SJ or Robin. I've just never been a big fan of the 10-year plan. This is just me. Hey, listeners, if that's your deal, awesome. I think that's great. But I'm kind of like, for me, what's the point?
Oh, yeah. Maybe it's fun to try to envision what it might look like.
Dream. Yeah. I love dreaming.
Right. But there was no way 10 years ago I would have thought I'd be sitting here podcasting.
No.
As a part of the team at Zoweh.
And it's not just movement directional, east, north, south, and west. It's movement depth. It's movement height, density. For me, Rob, it's been more like sailing. I'm not an expert at that. But what I understand is, hey, there are a lot of elements in sailing. The vessel itself, there's different kinds, different sizes. The bigger the vessel, and Zoweh has grown, it's become bigger. The more important the outrigger is, what's going on below the surface, the currents that the ship is on, the way the wind is blowing, that can even be in a different direction than the currents themselves. So all of that, it's not just like heading down the highway, mile marker after mile marker.
Kind of mindlessly going, yeah.
Yeah. I cannot say sailing without thinking of who.
What about Bob?
Yeah.
I sail. I sail.
And I feel like that's us, right?
I just recorded that on DVR, man. I can't wait to watch it. It's been a long time.
It's like God puts us on this vessel, right, on this ship, and we're Bob, tied to the mast.
Yeah.
Just kind of an ornament. Where are we going? What are we doing? Oh, yeah. Lots more to talk about. Maybe when we do the founders piece and talk a little bit how Zoweh came to be. But when I think of all the pillars, their importance, I just think they're discoveries. They're discoveries along the journey. They became part of how we spoke, what we taught, what we talked about, because we discovered them on our journey with God to becoming more.
Mm-hmm.
So the four pillars: orientation. Who am I? Identity. Where am I? The environment that I'm in, spiritual realm, physical realm. And this idea that God's up to good in my life. What is the sanctification journey? So the more we found ourselves repeating ourselves and in different spaces being invited to speak or share, the more these became solidified, which is what I think about pillars. I love the images that Cole brought to the website even about the four pillars,
Yeah.
Well, I even remember early on, we were so impacted and influenced by Ransomed Heart when I went out to Captivating. And I remember going back time and time again and bringing friends because I wanted them to experience the more. And I discovered more each time. But to your point, when we came back and we started offering this to others, this message of more life and more love and more freedom and the more, I remember we initially just started sharing the things that we were hearing and reading and tasting.
What God was showing us.
Those first minutes, what we were drinking and tasting. And it was almost like I remember just reading quotes that were striking me and things like, I want this to be true. But they became more and more true for us over the days and weeks and months and years. And I have been so aware looking back how much we have evolved from, even in sharing from the deepening weekends, a lot of my notes from attending some past
other conferences
to sharing more of my own stories of how this is true in my life and how I've encountered and experienced God and the more for myself. So that's a way that I've seen us grow in this over the years, looking back.
And I immediately think of just how we are as people who share good stuff, whether it's a song.
Yeah.
Or a restaurant.
A movie.
Right now, during COVID, I mean, we're all kind of, hey, what are you watching?
Yeah.
Are you watching the series? I need a new series.
I need a new series. I've watched all of Netflix.
Yeah.
It happens to us all the time, too. We've got a text thread, listeners, for our entire Zoweh core team, and someone will post something up on there. Hey, look what found me this morning.
The mornings are active. The mornings are active. It's great.
I love that.
It's great if you aren't in something, because it's like fishing. I mean, the team's going to throw a fish or two in your boat. I mean, here, look at this. Look what I found. Look what found me. So all of that, I would say, Robin and SJ, as we talk about this particular pillar, more life, more love, more freedom, this was probably one of the earliest, if not the first, this life of more. The word Zoweh means life. It's the Greek word for life. It's in John 10:10, I came that you might have Zoweh. There was even a time, we'll get to this in another conversation, but I just remember it's spelled Z-O-E. And I only used it for a short time because people called our ministry initiative Zoe. And we had a dog named Zoe. It just didn't fly. It wasn't working.
Right.
And it was a little tiny
But the enunciation was
cockapoo
more.
or whatever it was.
That's right.
Yeah.
The cockapoo story. Yeah, that made it even worse. So,
yeah.
But the enunciation was more Zoe, like Yahweh.
Right.
Zoe. And I love that. So we just moved things in that direction. And I would say, Rob, like you were mentioning, there was a time when the idea of more life, more love, and more freedom was more of a forecast.
Hopeful.
Yes,
hopeful.
and wanting,
Yeah.
and still is a desire of our heart.
Yeah, absolutely.
But we have sailed to places, and we have seen things, and we've experienced and encountered God in spaces that we know this is even more and more and more true. That with God, right, there's always more. That's why we have the Exploring More podcast.
Right.
We were batting that around, one day. Well, what would we call the podcast? What's it about? Well, there it is. It's exploring more because we believe with God there is always more. More of what? More life, more love, and more freedom.
Yeah, I think it's great, too, that this pillar, more love, more life, more freedom, is the last pillar that we're covering in order of importance. They're all important, right? But in order of importance, it was what we just decided this would be number 4. But what I'm hearing you say is that it's oftentimes the first one that's discovered. And it was for you guys, it has been for me. Yeah. Just even as you find this podcast, listeners, it's like, wait, there's more to explore. There's more to discover. There's more to a Christian life than simply waking up on Sunday, going to church for a couple of hours, giving 10%, and then doing it all over again next Sunday and asking forgiveness again and getting saved for the 10,000th time.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? There's more to it than that.
Yeah, I found since I've been sharing that, SJ, I actually thought I had set a record. I've actually found some other people who have accepted Christ more than me.
Wow.
Which, go ahead, Moonwalker.
Yeah.
You have the floor. So,
right.
But, Rob, what you're implying and making a really great point that if there's more and you come to realize it, it doesn't have to mean that you've settled for less, but it is an invitation to move.
Yeah, you just weren't aware. Maybe,
Yeah. So, Rob, because we discovered more, just some of those first introductions almost 15 years ago when, we're cruising along, we're on staff with a very large ministry that is wonderful. But why don't you just describe a little bit about when did the more awaken to you that if this is true, this changes things?
Yeah, and what does more mean? I mean, the good
heart, warfare. There was a lot of things that we didn't really have files, within our journey yet. But how about you? Just the idea of more life being larger than what we had.
Like I said, that first weekend out in Colorado, and then subsequent weekends, I remember everything opening up for me, almost like I was watching or experiencing life, watching a movie on my phone on a tiny little screen, and being at that Young Life camp in this huge room, watching the film clips on the large screen, watching and hearing these women talk and share of their experiences with God. I could not believe that there was so much more in the spiritual realm. And many of you have heard me share this before, but I had never experienced God as my father that way, and being the beloved daughter, receiving his love, knowing that I was experiencing for the first time that I was absolutely adored and delighted in and cherished, that he was all these things that I'm sure I had heard the verses before, that he had engraved me on the palm of his hand, that he sings over me, that he dances over me, that his delight is in me. These things that was the focus, his heart and his goodness and his love for me. That changed everything. But yet also in that same weekend, there was Jesus portrayed as this fierce and yet kind king that I had never seen him in that light, and all that opened up, and in the spiritual realm of angels and demons, and that there was so much more going on than I ever had any concept, the larger story. So all of that, I think my eyes were just as big as saucers that whole weekend. So it thrilled me. And it felt like a fire hose, all the stuff coming at me, but thrilled me that there was so much more, that it went from a life, like you were saying, that felt more dutiful, that felt smaller.
Yeah.
I remember one of the girls that I was working with at the time on campus asking me, why Christianity? And I remember at the time, the only thing I had to offer her was, there's hope. There's hope for heaven. That's all I had to offer her. There is hope for heaven that's coming, whenever that is. There's hope.
And you want to be ready for that.
And you better be ready. But it wasn't a reality in my life of intimacy with God. That was another thing that was so huge for me, was understanding how accessible and intimately acquainted with all my ways God is, and long to be more and more so. And that my heart was good, so I didn't have to be ashamed. I didn't have to hide, that he wanted to know me, that it was a partnership with him and a dance with him. It was all these things that I was like, oh my gosh, I had no idea. And how it impacted everything. For me, it was, as a mom, that was huge for me. And seeing my daughters and their hearts newly in working with other women, but really it just had to start with me.
Yeah, I'm with you. SJ, this is part of your story. When you first went to your first Zoweh event, where Rob and I started with some Ransom Heart events, we just you got to come to this thing.
Yes.
You got to, we were like the Samaritan woman.
Yes.
You have to come hear this.
Yes.
You have to come be a part of this, because if you drink from this well, what happened to us might happen to you.
Right.
It was that kind of sense.
And I would bring friends every time the doors would open, as you would, Michael. And I remember I had a small group on Monday night, which I still have that same small group, but the women are different now, but different groups of us would go. And then we would come back. And I remember the conversation, how it changed after those weekends. It was about, how are you seeing God? How is he coming for you?
Yeah.
It was, I remember one girl talking about an owl that she saw, that she, in the time and the space, she knew it was God coming for her. And she wept as she told the story. And we just took turns telling those stories of how God was showing himself. But I don't believe God was showing us any more, perhaps, but we had eyes to see it. We were looking for him. We had eyes to see it. We were pursuing him, and we were realizing how he was pursuing us and seeing it in many ways for the first time. And that was amazing.
Yeah. Theologically, I can't explain that mystery. Who's at work? Is it me coming awake? Is it God, bringing awakeness? I'm not sure I want to get into the technical component of that. I think we have our Calvinistic Reform friends, we have our Arminian friends, and we have friends in between.
That don't know what either of those things are.
And that's good. It's probably good that you don't. But I'm with Robin. SJ, I know you have a story that you entered the kingdom later in your journey. Robin and I were born into and inherited a kingdom life. We wouldn't even call it a kingdom life at that point. It's Christianity. Our parents did church, went to church, and in Robin's case, kind of organized church. And so I think of the transition that you're talking about to more love, more life, more freedom. And I really had some academic and theological accomplishments in my journey, in my story. I mean, crud, man, if you go to that many church services, you're going to pick up something.
And the amount of training that we had.
And then joining a ministry, the amount of training that we had. And so I'm not saying, SJ, yours is better or worse for that either.
It's different.
It's just different. And it's a different storyline where I know Robin and I were not immune, even though we were church-going kids with church-going folks and all that we learned academically and theologically. I like that you talked about Jesus as king. That was not in my language for 30-some years. I knew he was a king, but I didn't see him primarily that way. How I was brought up, he was Savior.
He was the lamb.
He was the lamb, not the lion.
Right.
He was a Savior. And the fact that I see him more as my king doesn't make him less of a Savior. It's just back to this conversation of more.
Right.
Being saved is a wonderful thing, but being alive, being fully alive, I feel like there was some places that I graduated. And it wasn't just black and white. I don't want to diminish the theological and the academic journey I was on for several years. But I've said it like this. It was like going from the 6 crayon box to 12 to 30, whatever it is, to 64. I mean, not just the gospel, Christianity got that many more colors. And then it became, what does this one do? What does this one mean? What does this look like? And the nuances, like you said. I mean, I wasn't quite Dorothy from the black and white to the technicolor, but it sure opened up, like you said, eyes to see. And there was a lot of moments when I was first hearing about more that I had to question it all. Wait, I've been in churches for a long time. I know what you're talking about because I've heard so much about that, but I haven't heard it talked or sequenced or colored that way. And that's when it got to be disturbing, provoking, inviting, disruptive,
that's a good word.
and then relieving. Not all in the same moment. I'm saying that was kind of the journey I was on and the swirling of it. It was like being in a storm and things were getting enhanced and things were getting either broken off of me or added to me. And I just wasn't quite sure which at different times, but I knew the more, I like the word you used too about encountering God, believing, being invited to believe is where it started, that there was more and then that it was time. It didn't mean that, I was punished or indicted. Asking God questions, those were some things that just absolutely took me out of the academic and theological. And with that, I feel like into exploration of, wait, there's more? There's more than what I know? And then to just find out, oh yeah, there's owls, there's Aslan, there's Christ figures, there's war and battle. I knew there was a war, I just wasn't at war. I heard one of my friends say the other day. Spiritually, theologically, I knew we were in a war. I just wasn't in it or at war or not in it to the way that I could enforce, I could walk in the authority in which God was giving me and the goodness that I possess as his son in the kingdom.
Yeah, there's a big difference between, oh man, I have to ration gasoline and bullets whizzing by your head, right? Okay, you know that we're at war and there's some consequences. I'm talking about World War II now. We haven't really experienced those kind of consequences in modern times where we had to do can drives and metal drives and rubber drives, and, sugar was rationed and gasoline was rationed.
The resources, right?
Right. We haven't really had to deal with that, but there's a difference between experiencing the war in that way, the results of us being at war, and being the guys that are taking the beach in Normandy. Huge difference there.
Yeah.
So, that awakening that you're referring to, that's missionally what we at Zoweh were so about. We're trying to wake people up through this message and the message of more. When we come back from the break, I want to talk a little bit more about more and maybe ask you guys a question about why do you think, again, this is the last pillar, and kind of some of your thoughts like that. So we'll be right back, listeners.
Sure.
Ladies, what if you or the women in your life could live from a heart that is settled in love, convicted of its worth, and moved by purpose and true desire? What if you could live unafraid and unashamed, sure that you belong? Welcome to the Deepening Journey, a 6-session video resource and journal workbook designed to be experienced together with other women or even on your own. It was recorded at Zoweh's Deepening Weekend for Women, birthed out of friendship and conversations between our guide team. Learn to experience belovedness. Our hearts need rest, comfort, clarity. We need a chance to be still and hear from God. We invite you to explore with us how we were made to live in God's kingdom and to flourish. Learn what comes against that flourishing and experience the offer of healing, integration, and restoration. Visit thedeepeningjourney.com to launch your voyage into a new chapter in God's kingdom.
Welcome back, friends and allies, to the Exploring More podcast. Even off mic, it's funny, SJ, what you were talking about. It makes sense, right, that this is the last pillar. And I even said, well, it might be the first pillar.
Right.
Because, right, you said it circulates, right? It moves and they support one another. And that's what the point is. They support one another. They support the four corners
That's right.
of Zoweh and what we believe, who we are now.
Yeah, but
and where we are now.
When you think about more love, more life, more freedom, if you want more, you kind of have to embark on the journey of going after it, or maybe for you, there's a certain subjectivity to it, right? Robin, I love how you shared your experience with Ransom Heart and how your eyes were open. You talked about them being wide as saucers, and taking it like a fire hose, all of that information. And the subjectivity of that for you, that was your experience. There could have been other people there that maybe were hearing it differently for the first time. That's what I love, the personality of God, and that he intimately knows each one of us and speaks to us that way, comes after us that way. Like he knows us better than anyone else because he does, right? So then when you talk about more love, more life, more freedom, like I said at the beginning of the podcast, there's this kind of awakening, oh, there's more. And then as you go into exploring what more there is, you go after intimacy, oneness, connectedness with God. You go after orientation.
These are the other pillars.
The other pillars, right? You go after nothing to hide, prove, or fear. And then you have embarked on that part of the journey, and then you get to start over again. Okay, well, I get to be more intimate with God, and God reveals more to me and gets me more oriented. So it's just this really cool cycle that we get to go on.
Yeah. Rob, when SJ said that, what just came to me was our 30th anniversary just in June, and more intimacy, more love. I love Robin more in 2010 than I did in 1990.
Or in 2020.
What did I just say?
Than you did in 2010.
Did you love me more 10 years ago? Is that what you're saying? Than now?
No. And I was going to say, and even more in 2020. I don't know why I got stuck on 2010. I was trying to do 30 years math in my head and I added wrong. But my point is that you can grow, you can deepen, it can. The odometer moves.
It really almost has to a certain degree.
Or it doesn't. And
right, because, I've talked to guys, honestly, I have to tell you this, honest, 100%. This sounds like something you would never hear someone say or like the butt of a joke. But I had a guy say to me one time, I told my wife I love her on the altar. And if anything changes, I'll let her know. Like that's
so
not
bad.
okay.
No,
that is
it's
the
not.
opposite of what we're talking about, because you're just saying this is where we are. We're going to stagnate here and survive.
Yes.
And so I think that's what a lot of folks do. You know, they kind of, hey, Jesus, thanks for the get out of hell free card. And if anything changes about how I feel about you, I'll let you know.
Well, I was saved and was told I've got to learn as much as possible about this book. And that's not bad. But I think when it was time for us anyway, the invitation was God saying, I want you to know as much about me.
Yeah.
Right.
And there are things that aren't in the book that I want to show you that you'll see the book will support. The book's never going to be contradictory to what our experiences, our encounters are, the book being the Bible, right? But that whole idea that I wasn't just reading about people's lives in the Bible who connected with God and God connected with them. I actually was given a lifetime pass of exploring, experiencing, and seeking, asking, knocking, right, for God. And I can't describe it other than that. It was a shift from learning and knowledge about God to encounters and experiences with God, hearing his voice, feeling his love, being loved, and that idea of intimacy and growing. So it was like I got to meet and be with a person that I had studied about for 30 years. And oh my gosh, it is him.
Yeah.
It's him. And then he began to take me into more, right?
It sounds like a setup too, man. You know, okay, here's salvation, and then read this book, learn all about this book. It sounds like a setup to keep you distant from God.
Well, the sin issue.
I'm not saying that was intentional, right? Like, study the book. I can just see, little Mikey,
at 38,
or at 8, right?
Yeah.
Believing like, okay, this isn't someone I can know and that will love me. Here's another book I got to study. It's a setup to keep you distant.
Being in an enclosure, being in a cell was the sin piece. That was the thing that solidified something's wrong with me. The level that I can achieve or accomplish or grow to or become, because the sin was emphasized, that was the barrier to Mikey and then Michael. And so the proposition that, well, what if the sin got taken care of? What if the cross really was that good? And now there's nothing in between you and God, you and the Father. And the Spirit can live inside of you, and Jesus is going to train you up in life, in freedom, and love you. I tell you, the crayons just went boom, 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 boom.
They split into way more colors.
Colors just rolled, and I was like, wait a minute. Wait a minute. Yeah.
Yeah, and I remember one of the things that we would offer and share to people when we were trying to share our faith with everybody we possibly could, right? It was that there is a relationship with God that is possible. How true that is. And yet I know for me, I felt more like I was talking at God most of the time. And I was reading his word and I was praying and then doing. And I didn't realize that there was a receiving of his life and his filling and his anointing, and that I could bring the kingdom, that there was a possibility of hearing his voice, maybe not audibly, maybe, but in so many other ways that he is coming for me and he is speaking to me that I had no idea it was that active and engaging a relationship, that there's actually a oneness and an intimacy that could be cultivated. And I even think about you and me, and we were talking about our 30th anniversary, and Michael did such an amazing job of surprising me with inviting some of our closest friends here to celebrate 30 years of our marriage. And
like everybody who had COVID celebrations and graduations and ceremonies, I mean, it was not very free, truly, but it was a great day.
It was. And I even feel like, Michael, that this year, 30 years, I feel like we're entering into a new place, even in our relationship, where it's been easy for me as a 9 on the Enneagram, if any of you are familiar with that, to kind of maintain, stay safe in my smaller inner world, to hide, remain small, and in a way to guard my heart, but yet also just not to enter in well and engage well and love well with more risk, and even in our marriage. And I even see the invitation to more with you and me and what we're exploring together. We've been able to talk about some hard things, and not just with our kids. That seems to be wonderfully ongoing as things ebb and flow there. There are victories and there are still
setbacks.
But even just the two of us, and how learning how to love you well and receiving love well. I'm realizing my things that are in the way of that. And have started seeing a counselor for the first time in my life about that, because I want to do that better. I want to do that more. I want to be more free, talking about more life and more love and more freedom.
Yeah.
Even though we've been tasting that and experiencing more for 15 years, I am aware in the kindness of God to show me there's still more, Robin. I want to show you more places that you are not free. Yeah.
I think it does. It gets into detailed strokes. It gets into really finer lines, which you would want it to.
Personalized.
Yeah, when you learn to take your time with a bite of something so that you can taste and experience really what are these flavors. Learning how to move slower in the kingdom, learning how to pay more attention to what I'm feeling, what I'm thinking, where's this from? I mean, that's the life of more. And at one point it might have sounded daunting. Now it feels really normal. And I think for this particular pillar, to be loved is really what we really want to establish as that's the gold. That's the deal. We were created to be loved by God.
If you don't believe that you are beloved or lovable, how do you experience more love?
Right. Well, that's what's in the way.
That's what's
right.
in the way,
so
right? So you got to get that through.
Jesus came to get everything out of the way that's in the way of being loved.
Right.
So yes, that's sin. That's people sin against you. That's sins you created. That's a sinful
vows,
world.
Agreements.
So bringing that from that academic theological, just so everybody knows I'm not chucking all that. I'm saying those were some of the ways I thought about me, about God. Even after all that church, they weren't helpful. They weren't true. And they were in the way of life, of more life, coming alive. If the offer of the gospel is the forgiveness of sin, that is so that you can be alive in Christ.
Because sin is death.
Right. So we're brought to life. Resurrection, to be resurrected, to be redeemed, and to be restored. These are all the words that this pillar is really trying to invite you into exploring, tying these together. The more I'm loved and experiencing the love of anything, my dogs, my wife, I'm going to grow this, and my God, right? To being loved by God, it has a modifying effect on my soul. And wouldn't you want that? And sermons are great. I like those. I like teaching.
They're great reminders.
But if they're not helping you experience the love that you were made for, something's not right. And so that's where this battle of life and death, what's in the way? What beliefs are not serving me? Well, if you don't believe you're worthy of love, there's a place God will want to take you to see that moved out of the way. So the movement from love to life, the more I experience love, the more I see my Father, my King, and the Spirit loving me to what? To life, fully alive, getting things that aren't good, that aren't helpful, and that are not true out of the way. That's how I get free. I get more free.
More love, more life.
Yeah, I wanted to tie those up.
More freedom. Yeah.
The more free I get, here's the last effect, Rob, and I want you to swing at this too. The more free I get, the more I want to talk to people about how God's loving me, what my life in the kingdom is about, in the hopes that you might want it too. Maybe I could help you. Maybe I could point you towards this idea of encountering and experiencing God. It was Barkalow, our good friend Gary Barkalow, who taught us awaken, deepen, fulfill. Awaken, deepen, fulfill. He awakens us to the truth. He awakens us to goodness. He awakens us to desires. Then he deepens us in those things. And then they become part of us. They become part of our story.
Mm-hmm.
They become part of our journey. And they become part of the way we talk. And when they become part of the way that we talk, directly or indirectly, they become part of what you offer. You talk about the things you love, and you tend to complain about the things you don't.
Yeah. And many times it's not even what you say. It's just your presence.
Yep. And the effect.
And your behavior changes.
The impact, the effect of that. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, for our team, when we started sharing this life of more love coming alive, and the more life becoming more and more free, and then you repeat it, you move, and now we're back on the ship. Are we catching the wind today?
Mm-hmm.
Are we sailing the currents? Should we find a nice safe cove because it's really not a good day to sail?
Yeah, or is it time to tack and go back
And
because
hang?
we have to angle a certain way to catch the wind?
Yes. Are we going into a storm? All of those things. And I have said this for years. You guys have heard me a few times. It's the storms that make for the best sailors, and learning how to navigate. I agree with you, Robin. There was a good handful of years at least where we really were apprentices in this. John Eldridge, Gary Barkalow, Ransom Hart, Dan Allender, others that were just beginning to show us and teach us. And then they gave us compasses and said, hey, go explore. What they were telling us, what they were showing us in their lives and journey, it became, yeah, I get that. Let me tell you what happened to me yesterday. Let me tell you what God showed me. And that's when it got really good. That's when it got really, really interesting. So for you two, let me throw the question back. More love, more life, more freedom. How do you see your story and journey kind of inserted in that, and how that's become more and more true for you?
I'll share a story with you that just happened the other day. I was on a walk, and I actually had woken up that morning feeling really sad, which is not like me. I typically am very steady and glass half full, and I'm not prone to ups and downs. So this felt different to me, and I just felt really sad and just on the verge of tears. I went on a walk like I do it every morning and was asking Jesus about it. What is this sadness? I was particularly thinking of one of our daughters who was in a really, really hard, dark place at the time. The options kind of came to me. I'm asking Jesus, what is this? And my heart was open. I don't feel like I said, what do I do? But it was like, okay, is this warfare? Is this sadness? It's almost like he brought the options to me. And I know we talk about warfare and certain things. Okay, is this sadness? Is this a warfare? Invitation from the enemy to take me out? But it didn't feel like that. And then the thought came to me, okay, benevolent attachment. I've been learning about that. That has been something that's been really helpful for me as a mom, especially in when is it healthy for me? Well, it's always healthy for me to give each daughter to the Lord and to say, I give this one to you in this scenario and take my hands off it and trust you that you have her and that you are pursuing her and that you are up to good in her life. And I can take my hands off trying to control and trying to coordinate all the things so that she would meet you. I can release her to you. So I thought, all right, I think this is a benevolent detachment thing and I need to pray. But that really didn't feel right either. Mm-hmm. It was just a sense of no. That felt like dropping it, or just kind of walking away from it and pushing down my sadness and ignoring it is what it felt like.
Benevolent meaning kind.
Yes.
So it wasn't a kind detachment to set it down or walk away from it. It didn't seem
didn't feel or seem
a kindness.
What it was actually about was I just knew in my soul that the invitation from God was for me to feel it and to process it and to grieve it. And it was an invitation that I just knew I just needed to grieve something that had been stolen from this particular daughter and that I had not grieved. And I just walked on my normal route that day, just crying, weeping, and talking with Jesus about it, just talking as if he was right there with me. And it was so good for my heart and my soul to just grieve and mourn and to feel his presence just right there in that. That's what my soul needed. Then when I got home, I was able to journal some about it, and that's what was needed. It wouldn't have been kind to my heart to push it down and to just keep soldiering on and marching on and keep walking. Okay, in this moment, what is needed? Is it warfare? Is it to let go of this? Is it to feel and grieve this? What about this? And that's the beauty of walking with Jesus. And I want to know his voice. I want to know the movements of my heart. I want to pay attention to what's going on, Michael, like you said earlier, inside me.
That's just not a conventional path to freedom. When we think of kind of, again, the Christianity I knew, it was going to more invite me to then go, do something, maybe for my daughter. Yeah.
And it might be.
And it might be.
But
My point is more freedom for my heart, for mind, body, and soul in grieving something. I have not allowed myself the kindness to process.
Yes.
Whoa.
Yeah.
That's just not 101 stuff. I know what you're talking about, but I did not know that was available.
Right.
This is the kind of journey with God that you're listening to him, you're sensing him. Do you want me to text her right now?
Right.
What is the next move? This is awakening. I want to awaken you to something you don't know yet. I want to care for you, Robin. And I want you to process this with me. Come on.
It is amazing. And it really is about more, right? And the more that Jesus has for us. So maybe a jumping off point for our listeners who are hearing about this life of more idea for the first time, right? When you have a situation like that, like the one Robin described, or any other of the thousands
or
of
vulnerability.
Yeah, you get to be vulnerable. Yeah. But if you have a situation and you're just not sure what to do, I think our tendency is to move towards a repair, a fix. How can I fix this? I don't feel so bad, or my daughter doesn't feel so bad, or this or that, and it's kind of not what Jesus means when he says he has more for you, right? So before even trying to make a decision, listeners, maybe could we take a few minutes, and I'm speaking to me here too, and say, Jesus, what's the more you have for me in this?
Yeah, it's a great prayer.
You don't even have to outline, is it warfare? Is it this other thing? Jesus, what is the more that you have for me in this moment? And just ruminating on that for a minute, chewing on that for a second and moving on. Hey, it's hard. It's hard, to discipline yourself to do that.
And you have to wade through some of the other options. Like if Robin could say today what that did, that it felt loving, it actually was bringing life to her. And on the other side of that was more freedom in a wounded place that got to grieve. That's this whole idea, this whole proposition of being loved by God. And when you are, there's more life. You feel more alive. And when you're more alive, you're more free.
Yeah.
And there's hundreds of ways and stories, I think, to get into that. But it's the way through those things, not around, not over. There's so many training and so many healing invitations, I think, that we are proponents of for our listeners, for our friends, and for our own lives. Here's what I'm feeling, SJ. I wish we could talk about it more, make it more linear, make it more like, here's your 1, 2, 3. But we've actually found it just not best.
That's what I mean. It's so subjective. It's just, another way to say that would be it's tailor-made for you.
Right.
And you either will stop and see that there's more there, or you won't. And Jesus, in his loving kindness, will be patient with you and wait for another opportunity to where you might see and offer Jesus into your desire for more.
But I like that prayer. Jesus, what's the more you have for me in this?
In this moment, whatever it might be.
And if it's not kind, if it's not loving, you need to stay with it, because I think the enemy loves to just kind of yell at you some alternatives. What is that prayer? That's not a prayer. I mean, anything diminishing, anything discouraging, anything distracting.
Or really, you're going to take the time to do this now? That this is an emergency. You got to figure this out.
Yeah, your daughter's in trouble. I mean,
all of that is not true.
And that's the learning, the rhythms of this, learning through the storms of this, how to sail, learning how to journey, learning how to explore. Like you said, SJ, it's so tailor-made. And yet, I promise you, you'll find somebody else who's been there, and it won't take long before somebody finds you once you've been there.
Oh, yeah.
To share.
No doubt about it. No doubt about it. Just to maybe kind of move towards, we usually say landing the plane, but let's move towards pulling the ship back into the harbor.
Docking the boat. That's right.
I found a quote, or it found me actually not that long ago. There's some argument as to who it's attributed to, but a ship in the harbor is safe, but that's not what ships are built for.
Right.
We want to encourage you, prepare yourself, of course, listeners, but point the bow to the horizon and see where Jesus might take you. It's an adventure. There's no question. We want to encourage you to go back and listen to our other Four Pillars podcasts if you want more encouragement on the journey. And thank you, Robin, for coming in and joining Michael and I today. It's so glad to have you here. And it was fun.
If you have questions or concerns, you can reach us at our Zoweh Exploring More podcast.
Email.
That's right.
exploringmore@zoweh.org.
That's right.
exploringmore@zoweh.org. We want to encourage you to go to our website as well, zoweh.org, and check out the resources that we have there for you and upcoming events and new projects that we're working on.
Looking forward to that too.
Yeah, we look forward to what's next, listeners, and keep on exploring.
We hope you have enjoyed this episode of Exploring More. The landing page for this podcast is zoweh.org/podcast. That's ZOWEH.org/podcast, where you can find the show notes and various platforms to which we broadcast. You can also find us and the Life of More by visiting Zoweh on YouVersion Bible app, Right Now Media, our Facebook page, and Zoweh on Instagram and Twitter. Remember, with God there is always more, and you were made for more.